What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Forever Human Podcast. My name is Slims, and of course, this is a space where we talk about mindset, discipline, growth, all the great things about being a human being. Today, I want to talk about something that I think is really important that I think a lot of people sleep on. Is books. Okay, we're gonna talk about books and reading. All right, now I'm gonna tell you, going through high school, I was in remedial math and remedial reading classes all throughout high school. I'm pretty sure I've got that ADD, ADHD, whatever it is. Anytime I try to read a book or read something, I could play a whole movie in my mind and not remember anything that I was reading. But over the past few years, I've tried to pick up on my reading and find different things, obviously in the self-help space. And over the past, I'd say 3 years, I never realized from before that point how much I was missing out on just going through some of these books. It's interesting when you really think about it, because some of these books, and I'm going to talk about a few of them, if you really think about it, somebody had went through whatever they went through in their life, and they thought it was so important that they needed to put pen to paper for other people to have and for other people to know, whether that's you're trying to learn a business, whether that's you're going through any particular thing. 9 times out of 10, there's a book out there with some good information on it. And I think the best way I like to look at it is that, the right book at the right time can make you feel like somebody handed you like a new way to look at life, whatever you're going through. I think one thing that's important when you're going through and looking at different books to read, depending on what you're trying to do, I like to call it book stacking, but it's one of those things where we take different subjects of books and we kind of read them in a particular order. For me, at first, I would get Audible and I was just listening to one book, and then I'd jump to another one, and sometimes I wouldn't finish them. But then I started learning about these book stacks, more or less. And I'll go through some of these here kind of to show. So one of my favorite books here is a book called Atomic Habits. This is from James Clear. This is an amazing book. And I started reading this book because I wanted to kind of work on not necessarily my schedule, but just not necessarily my habits, just the way I was actually going through and trying to knock out all these different projects that I had, right? Because I had ideas for days, and I would work on one day, then work on one another way. Then I try to stick to the gym, and then that kind of mess up. And then I found out about this book's Atomic Habits, and really in it really helped me kind of learn not necessarily that my habits were a problem, but me not having systems were a problem. And so once I went through this book, I stacked this book on with another book called 4-Hour Workweek, which I don't have here. And that book was one of the first books that really kind of changed my life. And the reason was it really kind of taught me how, number one, how to prioritize time. And stacking that with Atomic Habits, it allowed me to really set up the life that I have today. I was able to work multiple contracts at the same time. A lot of times, most I had at one time was 3 contracts at once. And people were like, how are you able to do that? And I was really only working 15, 20 hours a week. But it was because I was able to, number one, lock in my habits. And then number 2, from 4-Hour Workweek, learn how to optimize the tools that I have. Because a lot of the times, especially with people that I know that work in like different office jobs, they'll talk about how long things take or how things take forever. They just don't have enough time in a day. And while I do believe part of that is true, I also wonder, what is your process, right? How are you actually handling, or what tools are you using to get something done? Sometimes we don't know what we don't know, and you don't know that you could use Excel in a certain type of way or Word in a certain type of way to speed up a process of something you're trying to complete. Sometimes I also notice that if I was just in a bad headspace, looking at different books, especially this one book here, I call it pretty much like my Bible, more or less, is this book, Think and Grow Rich. This book right here, I try to read at minimum twice a year, if not more than that. It's one of those books that really helped me shift my perspective of how I view not only the world, but just myself and how I go after different things. I know it says Think and Grow Rich, but this is not necessarily about money. There's a quote that I heard Bob Proctor say, and he says, everybody rich, we're just short of money. This is one of those things where it allows you to take a certain situation, or not only just that, if you want to figure out certain goals or how to get to those goals, this book can definitely give you those keys to success to do that. And the great thing that I also like about books is not necessarily the instructions or things they may have. A lot of these have different websites you can go to get templates and things of that nature. But it's the stories that you hear in them, learning more about different other larger businesses, the owners of Walmart, Tim Cook, the guy from Apple, learn about different things that these folks went through. And a lot of that comes in this book. This is really like a book of books. It really can help show you that, or give you a perspective that'll allow you to kind of push through whatever you're going through. I didn't know Colonel Sanders was 76, 75 years old till he got, or 65 years old, I'm sorry, till he got his first franchise. Harrison Ford was another one. I think he was a landscaper, or he worked with his hands, a wood crafter till he was like 35, 36, until he started actually doing his acting thing. And so I think this is a really good book, especially this day and age where there's so much access to so many things with this technology, which gives us a million opportunities, but there's no real clear way on how to execute those things. And execution is key, because if you read all these books, you'll have a lot of knowledge, but if you don't execute on the knowledge, then it's not really worth a lot. I've got another book here, which is a book from Simon Sinek. He's also one of my favorite authors. Leaders Eat Last is really a good book for the leadership space, obviously, especially someone who is dealing with working with people. I think nowadays we really need to really think about what our definition of a leader is. When I look at these different corporations that exist, I think the problem isn't necessarily the corporation as a whole, it's the leaders that are in charge. And this book here, Leaders Eat Last, really depicts and talks about important things that leaders need to have in order to do their job, in order to really take care of people. I think it's a difference between managing processes, right, and managing how things get done versus leading a person, leading a human being, right? Leading a life is completely different. And this book really did help me and gave me some great stories to show how to create teams and make sure that teams work together, being understanding, learning how to listen to respond versus listen to understand when you're working with a coworker or somebody on your team. The last book I want to talk about here is The Psychology of Money. This is a really good book for understanding not necessarily finances. It's about shifting your perspective of how you look at how we use money in the world today. This really talks about, wealth, greed, happiness, how money in itself necessarily really isn't the problem. It's more or less all money is doing is making somebody, more of who they really are. But the psychology of money also gives you an insight on necessarily how we think with money. One thing it says in there is like, nobody's crazy, right? Everybody is doing what they feel is the best with their finances in their particular situation. Somebody else may look at it and say, well, you're wasting money here, you're doing that there. It kind of helps remove that comparison piece when it comes to understanding finances, how everybody does their finances different. There's not a one-way rules all. You've got to use Roth IRAs, or you should do this. You got to buy investment properties, or I think with the information that's out there, because it is abundant, it can create a lot of confusion. And I think this right here lets you kind of get your mind into a good place to start actually making some good financial decisions from a baseline perspective, and give you a better way to look at how you handle your own finances and your own money for your own life. So I know we went through a couple books here, and this is a little bit different episode than what we usually have, but I really think this is a really big point to hit on. I think there are a lot of books out there that can help a lot of folks. There are some other honorable mentions. There's another book from Simon Sinek called Start With Why and The Infinite Game. I think those are amazing books that people should read just to help them get a better scope, especially in a world that seems like it's going crazy. If you talk to anybody, the world's going nuts, everything's all over the place. But I think there's more to that, not necessarily more to that, but there's a different way to approach it. There's a different way to look at it. There's a different way to look at any situation realistically. But I think if people took the time, whether it's 20 minutes a day, an hour, a week, to go through and look for a book that's definitely dealing with what you're trying to do, if it's building a business, if it's trying to be more disciplined, if it's trying to understand how to invest better. There's a book out there that somebody's done the work already. There's no reason for you to reinvent the wheel. There's no reason to try to make something original. Find the book, read the book, take the ideas from it and apply it the best way you can to your own life. I think once you start doing that, and it definitely if you start checking out some of these books I suggested, you can see kind of the value in those things. The main part is making sure you execute after. But that's it for this episode. My name is Slims. I appreciate it. Hasta luego.